They say some moments haunt you forever, lingering like silent shadows, always present. It's been 2 years since that day, 2 years since everything changed. It was supposed to be simple, a trip to the beach with my son, Ethan. My husband, Gabriel, couldn't come. Work always came first, and I was used to that, used to the loneliness. But that day didn't feel normal, not then and not now. We spread out our towels, the sun warm, perhaps too warm. I lay down on the sand, feeling free, if only for a moment. Ethan helped me with the sunscreen when I asked. At first, it was natural, without any hidden intentions, but something in the air shifted. A fleeting instant that left a mark on me, an echo of something I didn't want to name. Gabriel and I had been married for over 15 years. To the world, we were the perfect couple. A beautiful home, wonderful kids, a stable life. But the cracks are only visible from within the walls. Gabriel's work had become his world, leaving ours in the background. Our conversations grew scarce, reduced to bills and responsibilities. I felt invisible, a shadow in my own home. Ethan, at 16, was already taller than me. He had his father's eyes, but with a softer expression. When I told him we were going to the beach alone, he simply nodded, unsurprised. Maybe he, too, was used to Gabriel's absence. The drive was quiet. I watched him as he looked out the window, headphones on. I thought about how quickly he was growing up, how time was slipping away. I thought about the days when Gabriel and I used to laugh, go out without a plan, share conspiratorial glances. Those moments seemed to belong to another life. We arrived and set up near the water. The salty breeze comforted me. I tried to start a conversation with Ethan, but his responses were brief. Still, he smiled at me. I lay down on the towel, closed my eyes, and for a moment, allowed myself to forget everything. But something inside me broke that day, a feeling I couldn't identify clearly, an unease that didn't disappear when we returned home. I told myself I was just tired, that it was all in my imagination. I tried to continue with my routine, preparing dinner, asking about school, folding laundry late into the night. But the memory of that day at the beach lingered in my mind. Gabriel came home late, as usual, his tie loose and his face tired. He kissed my cheek out of habit, without really seeing me. "Long day," he murmured, and before I could respond, he had already disappeared into the living room. I watched him walk away, and once again, felt that emptiness. The weeks passed, but the feeling didn't fade. Something had changed in Ethan too. He didn't avoid my gaze, but it wasn't the same as before. I found myself questioning things I had never thought about, searching for explanations, but none satisfied me. One day, I asked him, "Do you want to go back to the beach?" I'm not sure why I did it. Maybe I was looking for answers, or maybe I just needed to feel that everything was okay. The drive was silent, different from the first time. This time, Ethan didn't wear headphones. He just looked out the window with a thoughtful expression. The beach was almost deserted. We spread out our towels as before, but this time, I didn't ask for help with the sunscreen. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the sound of the waves. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel the tension in the air, a tension I didn't fully understand but knew was there. The real breaking point came later. Something in the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the air itself was charged with something I couldn't see, but could feel. I tried to ignore it, to act normally, but deep down, I knew something was wrong, something I didn't want to face. From that day on, nothing felt the same. I'm not sure exactly when everything changed, but I know things will never be the same again. There are secrets hidden within the walls of a home, shadows that seep through the cracks. And once you see them, you can't make them disappear. The days continued as if nothing had changed, but deep down, I knew everything was different. Each morning, I woke up feeling the weight of a secret I thought was impossible to bear. Gabriel continued his usual routines, working late, returning home with the same tiredness in his eyes, the same quick kiss on the cheek that had lost its meaning over time. Isa played in the living room, laughing, unaware that her family was teetering on an invisible edge. Ethan, on the other hand, had become quieter, not distant, not cold, just different. I caught him looking at me with expressions I couldn't decipher, as if he was searching for answers in my face. We didn't talk about what had happened, but the tension between us had become a persistent shadow. I tried to act normally, to convince myself that everything could go back to the way it was. But with each passing day, it became more evident that we had entered a territory from which it was difficult to return. One night, while preparing dinner, I felt his presence behind me. He didn't say anything, just stood there waiting. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was the only thing breaking the silence. I forced myself to continue with what I was doing, but my breathing was irregular, my pulse racing. Finally, I turned my head, and our gazes met. "Mom," Ethan said in a low, hesitant voice. "Yes, Ethan," I replied, struggling to stay firm. He opened his mouth but stopped, seeming to debate with himself, caught between what he wanted to say and what he knew he should keep silent. Finally, he shook his head and walked away, leaving me with my heart pounding in my ears. That night, as Gabriel slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I thought about my family, about the image of perfection everyone believed they saw from the outside. I thought about the weight of secrets, about how they can cling to your skin until they become a part of you. But most of all, I thought about how much longer I could sustain this facade before everything crumbled. Fate is relentless, and I knew that, sooner or later, the truth would find its way out. The days passed with a strange normality. The family routine continued. Mornings with the bustle of breakfast, afternoons in the park with Isa, nights when Gabriel came home late, and I pretended not to notice his lack of interest. But beneath that apparent calm, something was growing inside me, a tension I couldn't ignore. Ethan felt it too. I saw it in his gaze when our eyes met, in the way his presence seemed to fill every space with an invisible weight. We didn't talk about what had happened, but it was there, floating between us, waiting for the moment to explode. One night, after putting Isa to bed, I went out to the balcony in search of air. The city glittered in the distance, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I hugged myself, feeling the night's chill seeping into my skin. "You can't keep going like this," I whispered to myself. I heard his voice behind me, but didn't turn around immediately. I knew it was Ethan. I knew I would find him there with that gaze that seemed to see right through me. And what am I supposed to do? I whispered to the wind. Ethan approached slowly, leaning on the railing beside me. "I don't know," he admitted, "but this is going to destroy us." His sincerity disarmed me. For the first time in a long time, someone was putting into words what my mind had been trying to deny. I bit my lip, fighting against the storm of emotions churning inside me. "I know," I murmured from the window. The light in the living room came on. Gabriel was home. Reality hit us like a bucket of cold water. "Go," I whispered to Ethan. He hesitated for a moment, but nodded before disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. I stood there alone, feeling the weight of my choices becoming increasingly unbearable. Because, sooner or later, every secret finds a way to come to light. That night, I barely slept. The image of Ethan walking away down the hallway replayed in my mind like an echo that couldn't be silenced. How much longer could I sustain this? How much longer before everything came crashing down? Gabriel had fallen asleep in the living room, the TV still on, his phone vibrating occasionally with notifications I no longer bothered to check. I approached cautiously and turned off the screen. I looked at his relaxed face, his steady breathing. From the outside, anyone would think we were still the perfect couple. But in the darkness of our home, the silence screamed truths that neither of us dared to speak. The next morning, breakfast proceeded as usual. Isa chatted excitedly about a presentation at school while Gabriel checked his phone, a cup of coffee in hand. I nodded mechanically, pretending to be present when my mind was elsewhere. It was then that the doorbell rang, a sharp knock in my chest that warned me before I even stood up. "I'll get it," I said quickly before Gabriel could get up. When I opened the door, there he was, Ethan. He didn't say my name, he didn't need to. His gaze spoke for him. But what unsettled me the most wasn't his presence. It was the way his expression had changed. "Something's wrong. We need to talk," he said in a low voice, and my breathing grew rapid. I glanced at the dining table, where Gabriel was still distracted by his phone. "It's important," I whispered, trying to sound firm. "We need to talk," Ethan insisted, his tone leaving no room for doubt. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something told me that whatever it was only the beginning of what was to come. They say some moments haunt you forever, lingering like silent shadows, always present. I never imagined that something so simple as walking down the hallway of my home would have such a profound impact on me. At 50 years old, I've been married to Javier for 3 years. Our life together has always been quite peaceful, despite not having children of our own. Javier already had a son, Marco, a tall, quiet, and reserved 23-year-old from his previous marriage. When I first met Marco, there was an initial discomfort in our interaction, as if neither of us knew how to connect. We maintained a polite, almost cold relationship. I became a silent presence in his daily life, a figure he valued but didn't yearn for. Everything changed a few days ago. That afternoon, Javier left for work early, while I stayed home to tidy up. As I headed towards the guest room, I heard the murmur of water coming from the bathroom. Marco usually didn't take long showers, but this time, the sound lingered. I approached to mention something, perhaps to remind him about the water bill, but as I got closer, I realized the door wasn't fully closed. I should have turned away, but something held me there, just at the threshold. Steam was escaping, and the sound of water falling filled the air. I saw him, his silhouette barely visible through the mist. My heart pounded so intensely that I feared it might burst. I stood there, frozen, battling an internal struggle. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but when I came to my senses, I was overwhelmed with shame. I quickly moved away, trying to act natural, but the atmosphere had shifted. That evening, as I went about my chores, a storm of emotions raged within me. Guilt and shame washed over me as if I had invaded a sacred, forbidden space. Every time I closed my eyes, Marco's figure appeared in my mind. It wasn't the image itself that bothered me, but the emotions it stirred. I had never seen him like that, not as a boy, but as a man. I noticed details I hadn't before, the shape of his shoulders, the way his hands moved, and how the water caressed his skin. "Enough, Laura," I murmured to myself, trying to shake off the thoughts. I decided to put the incident behind me, but the memory lingered like a persistent whisper in my mind. When Javier returned home that night, I greeted him with my usual smile, listening to his day as if nothing had changed. But every time Marco came near, my breath quickened, despite my efforts to hide it. He didn't seem to notice, continuing with his usual calm demeanor. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard Marco's footsteps in the hallway. The silence grew heavier as he closed his door gently. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had shrunk, the distance between Marco and me closing in. Every time he emerged from his room with wet hair, or I heard the water running in the bathroom, my thoughts returned to that moment. I kept myself busy, cleaning the house, cooking elaborate meals, and even going for more frequent walks. One day, as I returned home, I found Marco sitting on the couch, watching TV. I tried to avoid him, but as I passed by, I tripped over the rug. His hand shot out instinctively to steady me. "Are you okay, Laura?" he asked, his voice calm and deep. I mumbled a quick, "Yes, thank you," avoiding his gaze, and hurried out of the room, my heart pounding. That night, alone in my room, I faced my darkest thoughts. What was wrong with me? I had love and stability with Javier, my husband, whom I loved deeply. But I couldn't deny the passion Marco stirred in me, a feeling I thought I had long forgotten. I hated myself for not being able to control my emotions, but deep down I didn't want that feeling to fade. The next day, I decided to go out and clear my mind. I needed space, something to help me sort out my thoughts. I went to the market, bought some groceries, and stopped at a cozy local cafe. As I looked at my reflection in the window, I barely recognized myself. My eyes revealed sleepless nights and the burden of a secret I couldn't share. When I returned home, the house was unusually quiet. I placed the bags on the table and started unpacking the groceries. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Marco was home, which was unusual for a weekend. He greeted me with a warm smile, asking if everything was okay. I tried to act normal, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me. He noticed something was different. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew palpable. I tried to convince myself that my feelings for Marco were just a result of loneliness and routine, but it became harder to ignore. One evening, as Javier was out for a work meeting, I found myself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes. I felt Marco's presence behind me. He asked if everything was okay, his voice filled with concern. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Sometimes, I feel like you're just as lonely as I am," he said softly. His words struck a chord deep within me. I had been living in silence, my needs and desires ignored for so long. Marco had seen through my facade, breaking down the last of my defenses. I tried to protest, but my voice faltered. He reached out, gently taking my hand. "You don't have to be alone, Laura," he murmured, his touch sending a wave of warmth through me. In that moment, all the boundaries I had tried so hard to maintain crumbled. I looked into his eyes, seeing my own reflection of longing and fear. I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to pull away. His lips met mine in a soft, tentative kiss, igniting a fire within me that I couldn't control. I lost all sense of reason, giving in to the desire that had been building for so long. As we pulled apart, I was filled with a mix of exhilaration and dread. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, and there was no turning back. The next day, the reality of our actions hit us hard. Javier was in the kitchen, oblivious to what had transpired. Marco and I exchanged a glance, knowing that everything had changed irrevocably. We were now bound by a secret that could destroy us both. In the end, we were consumed by the consequences of our actions, uncertain of what the future held. Despite the chaos, there was a part of us that wished we had never taken that path. But it was too late. We had crossed the point of no return, and there was no going back. If you found this story compelling, please share your thoughts in the comment section. Have you ever faced a similar situation where trust and loyalty were tested? How would you have reacted in Laura's place? Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on our future stories. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.